The fire burned low tonight. A thin amber flame shivered along the log's edge, its reflection trembling against the window panes of my study. Beyond them, rain traced long, uncertain paths down the glass, as though the sky itself could not decide whether to wash away memory or mourn it. On the desk before me lay a water-stained map of a very small state, Delaware, in the United States of America. A modest fragment of land between greater powers, it seldom demands attention. Yet small places, I have learned, hold the heaviest silences. They are where guilt lingers longest, and where the dead are least disturbed. I turned the map toward the light. Along its southern curve, a silver shape gleamed faintly. A pond, almost hidden by the faded ink of old survey lines. Lums Pond. The name alone hums like something left unfinished. A finger's breadth of still water surrounded by trees and marsh. It lies east of the old canal that once carried barges from the Chesapeake to the Delaware Bay. In the years when America was still unsure of itself, neither free nor enslaved, neither innocent nor wise. These lowlands bred their own quiet forms of cruelty, a land of small farms and smaller mercies, where the church bell tolled not only for the pious, but for those it condemned. The story I'm about to recount begins there, before the railroads came, before the wars divided brother from brother. A story of a girl, barely 15, who carried more grace in her silence than the world ever granted her in life. Her name, scarcely recorded, was Eliza Talbot. She lived, worked, and died near that pond. Or rather, she vanished into it. What followed was not merely tragedy, but the slow rot of conscience that settled over those who remained. They buried their shame beneath crops and sermons, and time, obedient servant that it is, helped them forget. Yet the water remembers. It mirrors not what is above, but what is beneath. Tonight, as the rain presses against these high windows, I shall reopen that memory. Listen carefully, for I do not tell ghost stories. I tell what the living have refused to remember. Delaware, in the middle of the 19th century, was a place between two truths. It was neither north nor south, a land that had not yet decided what mercy meant. Slavery lingered in the shadows of its barns. Freedom was spoken of in the same breath as obedience. The soil was poor, the summers thick with insects and silence, and the people learned early that survival required endurance more than kindness. In those humid years, when the air seemed to hum with withheld rain, a wagon rattled down a dirt road toward a small farm bordered by willow and pond. In the back rode a girl named Eliza Talbot, barely 15, bound by contract to work for a family she had never met. Her parents had died the previous winter, their names recorded in the almshouse ledger beside hundreds of others who had been claimed by fever and want. The overseers called her fortunate, a placed girl, fed, clothed, and employed. But the word fortunate often served as a veil for cruelty. The road turned past a field of half-grown corn where crows scattered like torn black cloth. In the distance, Lums Pond glimmered through the haze, its surface unmoving even under the wind. Eliza thought it strange that water could appear so still, as though it were listening rather than reflecting. The wagon creaked, and she drew her shawl tighter, not against cold, but against the unease that seemed to hang in the air. Her new home was small but orderly, a square house of whitewashed boards, its windows shuttered despite the heat. Beyond it, a patch of garden lay in perfect lines. The soil turned dark and heavy. Eliza stepped down and stood a moment, unsure if she had arrived at a place of safety or another kind of confinement. From the porch came the faint sound of movement, a woman's presence measured and watchful, and somewhere deeper within the house, a man's shadow crossing a window. That first day passed in a blur of labor. The rhythm of rural life admitted no hesitation. Water drawn, floors scrubbed, bread baked in the oven whose smoke clung to the rafters. Eliza moved through it silently, her hands remembering the motions her mother had once shown her mind elsewhere, caught between grief and numb resolve. Every task was an anchor against thought. Work was a way not to feel. When the light began to fade, she found herself at the edge of the property, where the trees opened onto the wide mirror of Lums Pond. The air smelled of peat and stagnant lilies. A heron stood in the shallows, so motionless it seemed carved from dusk itself. Across the water, the pines leaned inward, their reflections fusing with the real until the world appeared doubled. The pond's surface was perfectly smooth, yet it carried the strange illusion of depth, as though something waited beneath, patient and aware. Eliza knelt and touched the surface with one finger. The water was warm, almost human. Circles spread outward, disturbing the mirrored clouds. For a moment she saw her reflection distorted, not her face as it was, but a glimpse of how fear and exhaustion had aged her. The ripples erased it quickly, leaving her uncertain she had seen anything at all. The house behind her was quiet now. Smoke drifted upward from the chimney in a straight column. Somewhere inside, the day's routine continued in softer tones, the scrape of a chair, the closing of a door. But even from here, Eliza could feel the heaviness that lived in those walls, the kind born not of poverty, but of unspoken resentment. It pressed outward, following her even into the open air. As twilight deepened, frogs began their rough chorus. The heron took flight, and its wings brushed the surface like a whispered warning. Eliza stood until the last streak of light had vanished, then turned back toward the farm. Behind her, the water settled into stillness again, sealing itself as if no presence had disturbed it. That night, she could not sleep. The room beneath the rafters was hot, the air unmoving. Through the open window came the faint sounds of the pond, the lap of small waves against the reeds, the distant creak of the trees. Somewhere in that darkened landscape, a current shifted. It was not quite wind, nor animal, but the soft impression of something turning over in its rest. Eliza lay awake until dawn, listening. She told herself it was only water moving through the night. Yet deep down, she felt that something there had noticed her and would not forget. Morning rose over the Harland farm in a pale wash of silver. Mist hung low across the meadows, blurring the fences into memory. Eliza woke before the rooster and slipped outside, her bare feet sinking into the dew-cooled grass. The world felt gentle for a moment, until the first sound of the door behind her reminded her that gentleness here was only ever borrowed. The house's mistress, Ruth Harland, moved through each day like a soul determined to outrun its own sorrow. Years of toil had carved the softness from her face, leaving precision where affection should have been. She spoke little, yet her silence filled every room. It measured the worth of those within it. Her life revolved around the neat geometry of chores, bread, washing, prayer, and repetition. She demanded that the girls' movements follow that same strict rhythm. Eliza obeyed. To displease Ruth was to feel the air itself withdraw. Nathaniel Harland, the husband, was another kind of quiet, a tall man, shoulders stooped from fieldwork, eyes pale and unreadable. He worked from sunrise to dusk, hands blackened with soil and sweat, returning each evening with a weariness that seemed older than his years. His silence was not born of resentment, but of distance. as though his mind wandered elsewhere and left only the shell of a man to finish the day's tasks. Eliza learned his moods by the sound of his boots against the floor. Steady meant calm, dragging meant danger. Within the house, everything bore Ruth's order. The linens folded with military precision, the jars aligned like soldiers on the pantry shelves, the Bible placed open on the table, though no one read it aloud. Yet beneath that order pulsed unease, a brittle energy, like a string drawn too tight. The woman watched her husband's every glance, her son's every laugh, the servant girl's every gesture. There was nothing sinful in what she saw, yet the absence of sin gave her no peace. She seemed to search for fault the way others search for light. Eliza worked through the hours with the instinct of someone who knows she is being measured. She fetched water, mended seams, and swept the same patch of floor until the grain shone. The labor kept her body moving, but her mind drifted toward the pond. Each afternoon, she glimpsed it through the trees, a mirror flashing between the trunks. It drew her with a quiet insistence, promising something undefined, freedom, perhaps, or forgetting. Sometimes she imagined her reflection there waiting for her, living the life she might have known if the fever had spared her parents. Other times, she feared that what waited beneath the surface had no reflection at all. Summer thickened. The heat pressed down until even the insects moved lazily, and the fields reeked of ripened grain. The Harlan's small son grew restless indoors, and Eliza often took him to the shade while Ruth baked or sewed. The boy's laughter was the only innocent sound the farm seemed capable of making. Yet even that sound changed the air between husband and wife. Ruth would look up from her work, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in something darker, a kind of loneliness sharpened into suspicion. Guilt was contagious on that farm. It drifted like dust, settling on everything. Nathaniel avoided his wife's gaze. Ruth avoided her own reflection. And Eliza, caught between them, felt the slow erosion of self that comes from existing only as the surface upon which others project their fears. At night, when she returned to her narrow bed, she would stare at the wooden beams above her and listen to the house breathe. Beneath the crickets and the lowing cattle came the softer rhythm of two people losing faith in each other. The sound of the bedstead below shifting, the muffled sob, the quick intake of breath that might have been prayer. Each noise was a reminder that peace could not live where shame had taken root. Outside, the pond gleamed faintly in the moonlight. It had begun to appear in her dreams, sometimes calm, sometimes dark and roiling. In those dreams, she never entered the water, yet always woke with her hands damp, as though she had. By the harvest season, the tension within the house had grown palpable. The fields yielded poorly, tempers thinned, and Ruth's body seemed to shrink under the weight of her suspicions. She moved through her chores like a ghost, rehearsing the motions of the living. Nathaniel grew harsher in speech, slower in kindness. The boy, sensing what adults refused to speak, followed Eliza wherever she went, as though her presence alone might keep the house from cracking apart. No one would remember precisely when the final unraveling began. There was no single act, only the gradual corrosion of restraint. Shame, once private, had turned communal, and in the middle of it stood the servant girl, silent, obedient, and utterly exposed. Beyond the barn and the fields, Lums Pond waited, patient, watchful, reflecting the clouds with unnerving precision. Those who lived near it said the water never slept, that it held the day's light long after the sun was gone. Eliza began to think of it as the only honest thing she knew, vast, still, and filled with secrets it did not bother to hide. When the first autumn storm gathered on the horizon, she felt its weight long before the rain. The wind rose through the reeds in a sound like breathing, and she knew. though she could not have said how. Something within that household was nearing its breaking point. The storm came early that year, carried inland by wind that smelled of salt and iron. For 3 days, the air trembled with distant thunder, and every living thing seemed to hold its breath. The Harlan's fields, parched from summer heat, drank greedily from the rain until the soil turned to black mire. Inside the farmhouse, that same water found the cracks in the roof, dripping in slow rhythm onto the table where the Bible still lay open to the same unread page. The storm's arrival did not cause the breaking, it only revealed what had long been fractured. The house had become a vessel of suspicion, Teet's walls steeped in it, its air thick with it. The wife's silence had hardened into contempt, the husband's distance into bitterness. Even the child had gone quiet, sensing the vibration of dread that ran beneath every word, every glance. And at the center of it all was Eliza, whose existence had become unbearable precisely because it was blameless. The rain hammered against the shutters, and the wind clawed at the roof. The day fell into shadow far too early, and by evening the lanterns cast an amber glow that turned every movement into a silhouette. The air inside smelled of wet wool and something sharper, the tension of unspoken accusation. Shame does not erupt like anger. It seeps, slow and unseen, until it floods everything. That night it overflowed. No one would later agree on what had happened. Neighbors, gossiping years later, would claim there had been a confrontation, harsh words, the slamming of a door, the cry of a frightened child. Others would insist there had been no sound at all, only absence. But absence can be louder than any scream. Eliza fled into the storm before the moon had fully risen. She carried nothing, no coat, no lantern, only the weight of fear and the instinct to escape it. The rain soaked her within moments, plastering her dress to her skin. The road vanished beneath her feet. The world was reduced to the hiss of rain and the pounding of her heart. Lightning tore open the clouds, and for an instant she saw the landscape around her. The barn, the twisted trees, and beyond them the faint gleam of water, Lums Pond. It was both refuge and abyss. The wind pushed against her as if trying to turn her back, but she kept running. The earth was slick, the reeds whipping against her legs, the air alive with sound. Every few steps she thought she heard another set of footsteps behind her, but when she turned, there was only darkness. The storm blurred the edges of the world, making the trees shift like figures and the shadows deepen into faces. The water ahead glowed faintly with reflected lightning, and its stillness was unnatural, too calm amid chaos, as though the storm itself avoided disturbing it. She reached the edge and hesitated. Behind her, the fields lay swallowed in blackness. Ahead, the pond stretched wide and depthless. In that suspended moment, she realized that the line between escape and surrender had vanished. She stepped forward, perhaps to hide, perhaps to end, perhaps only to disappear long enough to stop being seen. The surface broke. The rain erased the circles almost instantly. The storm roared, indifferent. When dawn came, the clouds lifted to reveal a world scrubbed clean. The fields shone with water, the fences glittered with dew, and the pond mirrored the new light with deceptive serenity. Yet something in that reflection had changed. The heron that had once stood in the shallows did not return. Even the frogs were silent. The Harlan's farm awoke to absence. A chair overturned, a door unlatched, a child's cry unanswered. The husband searched the yard, then the road, his boots sinking into the mud. The wife stood at the window, her face unreadable, her hands trembling though she would never admit it. They found nothing except footprints leading toward the pond and the torn hem of a dress caught in a root. By noon, the neighbors had gathered, drawn as much by curiosity as concern. They spoke softly, avoiding the words everyone already knew. The men dragged the shallows with poles, their reflections fractured by each ripple. The women prayed, though none would meet each other's eyes. The water gave back only weeds and silence. Toward evening, the searchers withdrew. The pond lay smooth once more, untroubled. The surface held the last color of sunset, deep and metallic. Those who lingered thought they saw something pale drift just below the waterline, perhaps fabric, perhaps light, but it was gone before anyone could be sure. The night that followed was still and airless. The storm had passed, but its memory remained suspended in the pond's depths. Far from the farm, where the reeds whispered to one another in the dark, the first tale began to form, not among the righteous, but among the children, who understood such things more clearly. They would whisper that the pond had taken her because she had nowhere else to go. They would say the water kept what it was given. And though no one could prove it, every person who passed that way in the weeks that followed would find themselves slowing near the shore, glancing once toward the glassy surface, and feeling the uneasy certainty that something there was watching them in return. The week after, the storm hung over the countryside like an unfinished sentence. The air was heavy, but the clouds refused to break. Even the insects seemed to hum more softly, as if afraid of waking something. Life on the Harlan farm stumbled forward in a daze. The chores were done, but without rhythm, and every sound, bucket on stone, wind in the corn, seemed to echo the same hollow question that no one dared to ask aloud. At first, the neighbors came daily. They brought bread, advice, and the kind of pity that hides curiosity beneath prayer. Their boots left deep prints along the bank, where the men had dragged their poles through the mud. The water had swallowed their efforts without a trace. By the third day, the visits grew shorter. By the seventh, they stopped altogether. People learn quickly to step around grief once it fails to offer spectacle. Ruth Harlan's health faltered. She moved through her rooms like someone who had forgotten what each object was for. The dishes remained unwashed, the garden unweeded. Her eyes, once sharp with judgment, dulled into a fixed stare that seemed always directed inward. The neighbors whispered that she was haunted, but they used the word the way others use illness. It was easier to diagnose than to pity. Nathaniel kept to the fields, though the harvest was ruined. His shoulders had taken on a permanent stoop, the posture of a man carrying both anger and apology. He avoided the pond by daylight, but was seen there at dusk, standing motionless on the bank. Once, a passing mill worker found his lantern lying in the mud, still burning, though its owner was nowhere in sight. The worker set it upright and walked home quickly, refusing to look behind him. When the first frost touched the reeds, the stories began. The children of the village carried them farther than the adults' gossip ever could. They said the girl's hair still floated beneath the surface, drifting like weeds. They said she walked along the water when the moon was high, her face pale as glass, her dress trailing silt. Some claimed to hear a single splash each night, as if something surfaced to breathe before sinking again. The pond itself changed in small, measurable ways. The water darkened, its reflection too perfect, too still. Fishermen avoided it. Their lines came up tangled with pale threads that dissolved in their hands. Birds no longer nested in the trees nearest the shore. Even the wind seemed to skirt the edges, curling back toward the fields instead of crossing open water. Delaware's seasons turned, but time did not seem to pass within that circle of trees. The canal grew busier, the towns prospered, yet the Harlan property decayed untouched. By the 1850s, its fences had collapsed. Its barn leaned inward like a mourner. Travelers used the house as a landmark, the place before the pond, the one that burned its lanterns at odd hours. Ruth died one winter night when the ice on the pond was thick enough to bear weight. Her body was found seated in a chair near the hearth, her eyes open as if still watching the door. The child, long grown and sent away, did not return. Nathaniel lived alone another decade, his beard turning white, his hands knotted by work and guilt. When he finally vanished, the neighbors said the pond had taken him back. They did not search. The century turned quietly. Empires rose and fell beyond Delaware's borders, but Lums Pond remained unchanged, a mirror untouched by progress. Locals no longer spoke of it. Forgetting had become a form of respect. Yet those who camped nearby told of dreams thick with water, of waking to find their clothes damp though the night was dry. More than one traveler swore that just before dawn, a shape could be seen beneath the surface, suspended as though waiting for judgment. The watcher's interlude drifts through such silence. Water does not forgive, it only remembers. Every reflection is an act of confession, the world above forced to meet the world below. By the time the old century drowned in the new, the story of the girl had been reduced to a warning for children. But the pond kept its witness. Even in high summer, when the light was relentless and laughter echoed from passing boats, a sense of listening remained. The water looked asleep, yet it never truly was. It dreamed slowly, heavily, of a girl who had run too far and a world that had not followed. The decades that followed turned the landscape around Lums Pond into something half forgotten. Roads straightened, bridges appeared where fords once were, and the old canal widened to bear barges heavy with stone and timber. The Harland property disappeared beneath weeds, its last boards scavenged for firewood. Nothing remained but a rectangle of foundation and the faint trace of a path leading down to the water. Yet the pond itself did not change. It seemed immune to the slow, deliberate hand of progress. Its edges blurred into the surrounding marsh, its surface absorbing each season without reaction. Delaware entered an age of quiet industry. Small towns grew around mills and rail depots, their streets lined with houses that leaned toward respectability. Men shaved each morning and spoke of modern times, of reason and enterprise, yet they still crossed themselves when fog rolled in from the lowlands. The farmers' children grew into clerks and shopkeepers, and when they passed near the pond, they did not linger. No one needed to tell them why. The legend had thinned into superstition, something rural, unsophisticated, best left unmentioned. But forgetting does not erase, it only dulls the outline. Beneath that veneer of progress, the same unease persisted, patient as silt. There were reports, of course, though none were written down. A horse that refused to drink from the pond, rearing until its hooves cut the air. Fishermen who found their nets shredded by something they had never seen. A farmer's daughter who claimed to have seen a face beneath the ice, her own, but not her own, staring upward from the depths. The stories repeated themselves like a melody too familiar to vanish. The land around the pond grew poor, the soil leached by floods, the farms abandoned one by one. By the 1890s, the forest had begun to reclaim what had been cleared. Pines and willows bent together, their roots drinking from the same slow water. To walk through that place was to step backward in time. The silence was not peaceful, but expectant. It was said that sometimes, just before dawn, mist would rise in the exact shape of a figure standing on the bank. Those who saw it described not terror, but sorrow, a posture of someone searching for what could never be found. And once, after a dry summer when the water sank lower than memory, boys exploring the exposed shore uncovered a fragment of fabric caught around a branch. They said it crumbled to ash when touched. They ran home, but none told their parents why. By then, the Harlan's name had vanished from local records. Their descendants, if any remained, had moved north or west, carrying nothing but a silence they did not understand. The pond, deprived of human attention, became a sanctuary for everything that avoided notice. Reeds, frogs, herons, and the lingering residue of guilt. In those years, the watcher's reflection might have passed unnoticed across its surface, an invisible observer cataloguing the remains of a conscience long dissolved. What becomes of shame when no one remembers its cause? It does not die. It takes root in the landscape, altering light, sound, and even air. The pond was proof of that. Its water was not haunted in the childish sense. It was simply faithful. It remembered what humans chose to forget. When the 20th century arrived, carrying electricity and automobiles and new forms of disbelief, the pond met it with indifference. The state began to survey its lands, carving parks and preserves from the wild. Conservation, they called it, a kind of sanctification through bureaucracy. Lums Pond was marked on maps again, its name printed neatly beside symbols for picnic grounds and fishing docks. The paper lines meant to domesticate it, to fold mystery into recreation. But those who camped there spoke differently. They said the water was colder than any other in summer, and that sometimes it smelled faintly of lilac, even in the dead of winter. A few mentioned voices, soft, rhythmic, without language, carried across the surface when fog settled low. Park rangers dismissed such talk as imagination. Still, when they made their rounds, none lingered past dusk. So the years accumulated like sediment, memory layered upon memory until history itself became opaque. The pond endured, still and self-contained, neither cursed nor benign. It did not hunger, it waited. The world around it changed, and with each change came a new way of not listening. Only the water remembered, and remembrance, over time, becomes its own form of life. By the time the century had grown old enough to name itself modern, the land around Lums Pond had been claimed by surveyors and committees. They arrived with clipboards, measuring tape, and the confidence of those who believe that paperwork can pacify any wilderness. They saw in the still water not mystery but potential, an ideal place for recreation, for wholesome families and well-planned weekends. The forest was trimmed back, gravel roads laid, and neat wooden signs appeared bearing the new title, Lums Pond State Park. Beneath those signs, the ground remained the same. The soil still smelled of iron and root rot. The air still held the faint sweetness of decay. Nature did not protest. It simply observed the return of the company with its usual patience. Cabins rose where the Harlan fields had once been. Children ran through the grass, shrieking with laughter. Their parents tended campfires, their faces orange in the glow. The pond absorbed their noise and returned it softened, as if testing each echo. The first ranger station stood not far from the old foundation stones of the farmhouse, though few recognized them for what they were. The past had been folded neatly under picnic tables and gravel paths. Yet memory is not erased by design, it waits for attention. Before long, the rangers began to record the small irregularities that marked the place as different from the others in their circuit. Boats would drift without wind, turning slowly toward the center of the water. Campers reported hearing footsteps around their tents long after the park closed for the night. Once, a maintenance worker found a child standing knee-deep in the shallows at dawn, eyes open, unblinking, unaware of how he had come there. The incident was filed away under fatigue or sleepwalking or nothing at all. In the 1930s, when the Works Progress Administration improved the park's facilities, a team draining a section of marsh uncovered old iron nails and a handful of stones arranged in a line. They took it for the remains of a fence, and thought no more of it. Rain filled the ditch before the next day ended, washing the soil smooth again. Through the mid-century decades, the pond became a place of habit, of repetition. Every summer, families returned to the same campsites, pitching the same tents, photographing the same reflections. They smiled beside the water, unaware that each shutter click added a layer of ritual to the legend. Some of those photographs, decades later, would reveal faint distortions, a ripple where there had been none, a pale blur between the trees. Most viewers blamed the camera. By the 1960s, Delaware's mild quiet had become its own advertisement. The brochures spoke of safe woods, clean air, and simple pleasures. None mentioned that the rangers, after dark, avoided the northern trail by unspoken agreement. They had learned that the sound of water lapping there did not match the wind. It pulsed, irregular, like breath. One of them, an older man who kept his stories until retirement, claimed that on certain nights he could see a faint luminescence beneath the surface, not phosphorescent algae, but a glow that traced the outline of a form. When the park's administration modernized in the 1980s, a new generation of rangers arrived armed with radios, rule books, and skepticism. Among them was Anna Delaney, young, methodical, and eager to prove herself. She catalogued wildlife, managed trails, and handled reports from visitors about strange noises with patient dismissal. It was she who first noticed a pattern. Each complaint, each unexplained ripple, clustered around the same area, the stretch of bank nearest the forgotten Harlan property. In her off hours, she began to search the archives. The park office held boxes of brittle deeds and faded maps. One evening, under the hum of a fluorescent light, she found it. A ledger from 1843, ink browned with age. Among the neat columns of transactions was a brief note in smaller script. Eliza Talbot, age 15, indentured to the Harlans, presumed drowned, no record of burial, no further remark. She read the line twice. The room around her grew silent, as though the building itself were holding its breath. In that moment, the stories she had dismissed, footsteps, lights, whispers, shifted from nuisance to testimony. The pond was not haunted by invention. It was haunted by omission. That night, Anna walked the perimeter of the water alone. The air was windless, the surface perfectly still. The moon had not yet risen, and the darkness around the trees seemed to lean inward. She felt neither fear nor courage, only a strange familiarity, as if the scene before her had been waiting to replay itself. The pond carried her reflection with unsettling precision. For an instant, she thought she saw another reflection beside hers, blurred, as though someone stood just beyond her shoulder. Then the wind rose and broke the image into ripples. She left quickly, but not hurriedly. The night did not pursue her. It simply closed behind her like water over a stone. The next morning she told no one what she had seen. But from that day on, the legend changed again, not ending, merely beginning its next retelling. Autumn returned to Delaware with the same deliberate quiet that had followed every summer since the pond first filled. Leaves browned, mist settled earlier each evening, and the light over the water turned the color of tarnished brass. For the visitors who came on weekends, it was only scenery, an agreeable melancholy for photographs and campfire stories. For Anna Delaney, it became an invitation. She read more after that discovery in the archives. Not the official reports, but the margins, letters, sermons, and newspaper fragments. Each held a small absence, a mention of a lost girl, a domestic tragedy, a mishap by the canal. None spoke her name with certainty. Eliza Talbot had been reduced to the space between lines, the silence where guilt had taken root. The park brochures showed smiling families and numbered trails. But when Anna spread them beside the old survey maps, the same curve of shoreline appeared unchanged after a century and a half. Even progress had avoided that bend of water. The first frost came early. Campers packed their gear and left behind only the smell of smoke and the faint echo of laughter. When the gates closed for the season, Anna remained on duty, logging wildlife counts and maintenance notes. The pond, empty of people, resumed its older language. The wind spoke through reeds instead of tents, and the water regained its perfect calm. She began to walk its edge after dusk, lantern in hand, tracing the shoreline the way one traces the outline of a wound. Each night she told herself she was only studying erosion, cataloging change. Each night, the distance between study and reverence grew smaller. It was on one of those walks, cold air sharp with pine and decay, that she saw the light. A pale shimmer just beneath the surface, steady, not a reflection. It hovered where the depth fell away abruptly, where the bottom dissolved into darkness. She knelt, the lantern trembling in her grip, and the glow strengthened as if answering. Water slid over her boots, chill enough to sting. Beneath the ripples, a shape began to form. Shoulders, hair drifting like fine weed, a face unblurred by time. It was not horrific. It was unbearably human. The eyes looked upward, not with accusation, but with the weary clarity of someone who has waited too long to be seen. The world contracted to the space between them. Sound diminished until she could hear only the pulse in her own ears, and beneath it, another rhythm slow as the pond itself, heartbeat or tide, impossible to tell. Words rose unbidden in her mind, not spoken, but impressed there like the memory of a voice. Tell them I was good. The light broke then, dispersing into faint silver threads that vanished in the current. The water closed without a ripple. Anna found herself standing knee-deep, the lantern held high, its flame mirrored perfectly below. She stepped backward to shore, heart unsteady, unsure whether she had witnessed something supernatural or something inevitable. In the days that followed, she tried to resume her duties, to rationalize the experience into fatigue or suggestion. But the pond would not permit reduction. Each night she dreamed of it, sometimes tranquil, sometimes surging, always alive. In those dreams, she felt the same sensation of recognition, as though two lives, separated by centuries, had touched briefly and then receded again into their proper currents. The park reopened in the spring. New brochures were printed, trails renumbered, and the old ranger's station converted into a visitor center. Anna left a brief note in the logbook before transferring to another post upstate. Her handwriting was small, deliberate. North Bank stable. No further disturbances. Beneath the sentence, a faint watermark spread, forming a blurred oval that looked in the right light like a single tear. Visitors still come each summer. They fish, swim, and leave before dark. Sometimes, when the air is still and the sky begins to turn, someone notices a figure at the far end of the pond, a woman standing where the reeds bend, her outline faint as mist. By the time they call to her, the light has shifted and she is gone, leaving only the sound of water closing around a shape that never truly left. And so the story completes its circle, not with resolution but with endurance. The pond keeps what it was given: fear, shame, remembrance. It reflects them faithfully back to any who looks long enough to recognize their own shadow in its depths. The fire in my study has burned low again. Its light trembles across the shelves, gilding the edges of forgotten books and the dust that lies upon them like settled ash. Outside, the rain has returned, soft, persistent, indifferent. Lums Pond. A small name for so vast a silence, It remains still on the maps, labeled, measured, catalogued, yet never understood. The girl is gone and not gone. The farmer, the wife, the century that condemned them, all reduced to stories told in smaller voices each time. And still the water holds them, not as ghosts, but as memory made physical. The past does not haunt. It simply persists, waiting for someone to notice its shape beneath the reflection. I wonder sometimes what became of the ranger who saw her, whether she carried the encounter as a burden or as proof. Perhaps she learned what most do not, that truth is rarely luminous. It is heavy, slow, and patient. Like water, it conforms to every vessel that tries to contain it. And when the vessel breaks, it remains. The pond stirs within my thoughts, its surface trembling with the breath of centuries. I can almost see her there, that child of labor and silence, her hands open, her eyes calm. She does not accuse, she only endures. The world that forgot her has gone on naming itself good. Some stories ask to be ended, others only ask to be remembered. This one will not close. It will seep outward through soil and season, through the dreams of those who camp beside that water and wake with damp hands and no understanding of why. The pond will keep them, as it has kept everything given to it. And the pond, somewhere far away, remembers. It always remembers.